Good morning, everyone. Thanks for inviting me. As you see, I'm Mike Elliott. I'm from the Institute of Estuarine and Coastal Studies at the University of Hull. What I want to do this morning is try and talk you through some of the recent ideas about marine management and really talk about how we're linking the natural sciences and the social sciences. And hopefully those of you from different backgrounds will see how all the different fields need to come together. So ignore all the acronyms on the screen at the moment. Hopefully they will become obvious to you as we go through. And if they don't become obvious to you by the end, then I've failed. Okay, so I want to take this very wide approach to marine management. Now let's start off on the basis that there's only one big idea in marine management, as you see on the screen there at the top right. In essence, it's how do we protect the natural stuff while at the same time delivering the human stuff, what we talk about as ecosystem services and societal benefits. This at the bottom left of the screen there shows why we need these aspects of management. You know, we're going to recover or cope with historical legacy, things that have gone wrong or we've done to the marine system over the years. How we cope with endangered functions, the legal framework that we've got, and I'll try and talk you through some of this. The reason why we're using the seas now for economic prosperity and delivery of benefits, and then finally the climate change, dealing with that, what we talk about as moving baselines, but we'll see that there. When we manage any system, as you can see on this list of questions, you can see it's fairly simple. Yes, I know there's many questions there, but it's actually fairly simple. Where are the problems coming from? What changes do those problems cause? What are we going to do about them? And then in the what are we going to do about them, how do we bring together societal aspects and ecological aspects and economics and law and all that sort of thing. In essence, really to try and get good decision making there. So firstly we need to say, where are the problems coming from? And it's this whole idea of hazards and risks. A hazard is something that's going to occur in the marine environment. As you see from this list, some of these are natural, things like a tsunami may be natural, a landslip may be natural, sort of heavy rainfall may be natural, and some are anthropogenic. In some cases, the natural hazards we make worse by our actions. So tsunami is bad enough, but if we remove all the mangroves that are protecting the coast, then it makes it even worse. So that's the hazards. A risk is when the hazard affects something that we value. So our assets or our buildings or our lives or whatever. So we move from hazard to risk. And as you see there, some of these are surface hazards, too much water, some of them are the physiographic removal, cliff falls, some are climatological hazards, typhoons coming in. And then there's the anthropogenic ones, microbial hazards that we put in, macrobial ones, that is larger organisms that we put into the sea. And then you've got other anthropogenic ones like extractive technological ones. We're removing water from the sea. We might remove fish from the sea. We might remove sediments and so on. So we've got this set of hazards. Now we need a framework in order to assess and manage those hazards. And this is the framework. In essence, and this has developed over many years, this is developed from something that was originally called DAPSI, drivers, pressures, state change, impacts and response. But over the years it's been modified, and this is the latest kid on the block. And we think this is as much as we need to modify it now. So in essence, we have a set of drivers. So these are basic human needs. What do we need from the sea What do we want from our environment? And I'll give you an example of that in a minute. And then the next thing is activities. How do we get that? Well, we do stuff. We go fishing, or we build things. When we do that, when we do those activities, what pressures is created? And a pressure is defined as a mechanism of change. So what are we changing? Well, we're changing the state, the natural system. And then if we keep changing the natural system, eventually we affect us, humans, impacts on our welfare. So we need to do something, we need a response. So for example, basic drivers, we want food. So the activities, we go out and fish, or we build aquaculture pens or whatever. That then leads to a pressure. We scrape a net over the bed, we disturb the bed, we might remove space by building something. That then leads to a state change. If we remove the fish, if we scrape nets over the bed, we're going to remove the fish, so eventually the natural system is going to change. And if it changes too much, eventually it affects us. There's no fish for us to take. We've lost our fishing. So the impact's on human welfare. And so we bring in a response. In the case of fishing, we create the common fisheries policy, or we govern where people are allowed to do things. This framework has been used a few times now. It's called DAP SeaWorld. I started off as a seabed biologist, working on worms. So DAP SeaWorld rings true. It's just that every time we use this in a paper, the referees usually say, that's a horrible acronym, how do you pronounce it? So now we have to tell them in every paper we use the term DAP SeaWorld. So let's just quickly go through that. These are the drivers. And as you'll see from that, they go all the way from, if you're a biologist, if you're a natural scientist, you're probably more concerned with the drivers at the bottom there. Have we got enough food? Have we got enough water? What shelter have we got? And so on. And then as you go up through that, it gets more and more sort of esoteric, more and more sort of feeling good. But they're our drivers. So you see on the right-hand side that for well-being related to the sea, this is what we want. We want to have relaxation, enjoyment, we want employment, we want the waters to be healthy so we can swim in them and so on. We want space to carry out whatever we want to do in the sea, and we want it to deliver goods and food and water and so on. Now, there's a lot on this, and I'm not going through all of it there, you'll be relieved to notice, but these are the activities that we use in order to get those drivers, and you'll recognise these, the basic set of things that we do in the sea. They lead to these things called pressures. We smother the system, we might lose sediment, we might change siltation rates, we might put litter in, and so these are pressures. So these are pressures for the way we're going to affect the system. Now the term at the top there, endogenic managed pressures, this refers to pressures within a system. So if we're going to manage a system, say we're going to manage the North Sea, then things that happen within the North Sea we can talk about as endogenic. They're happening within the North Sea. And we can manage them there. And you'll see in a minute, it's things that are happening outside the North Sea that we also have to take care of. So these are a set of activities and pressures. Now you saw the DAP SeaWorld cycle. Whenever we have one sea area, which is the inner box that you can see there, the one that says boundary. So that's our inner sea area, or it might be our estuary, or it's a bit of the environment we want to manage. And it's got a set of these cycles in it. So cycle 1 might be we want food from fishing. Cycle 2 might be we want aquaculture. Cycle 3 we want to move goods around through navigation, and so on. So we started to talk about these as DAPSI worm petals, because it looks like a flower. So all of those things are happening within one C area. Hence the bit, the endogenic managed pressures. So these are pressures occurring within one C area. Okay? You with me so far? Good. Operating outside of that, we've got things called exogenic, unmanaged pressures. So these are things like natural change and things that we are not managing within an area, such as climate change. When we manage a bit of sea, we don't manage climate change from within that bit of sea. We have to do it globally. We have to adopt the Paris Convention and so on, the Paris Agreement there. So that's within one area, but it gets slightly more complex than that. When we're managing the sea, we can't just manage one part of it. What this shows is we've got those DAPSI worm petals for each part of the system. So for example, if you look at the one there, so that's an estuary with a few lakes in it and rivers, and it's got a lagoon there and so on. So when we're managing that estuary that you can see there, yes, we're managing the pressures within that area, but we have to take on board what happens outside it. Things that happen out at sea, things that happen upstream. Now, if we're just managing the estuary, say the outer bit, the wider blue bit there, if we're just managing that, then everything else apart from the stuff that's happening there is exogenic. The stuff that's happening within it is endogenic. But if, however, what we're asked to do, and increasingly, we're asked to manage the whole system together, you know, all the catchment or all the larger regional seas, then everything is endogenic. And if you think about it, where we're trying to manage systems from much wider afield than this. That estuary, for example, it will have birds on it, where the birds are affected by what happens out in the Arctic in breeding areas and so on. Okay, so that's all the endogenic stuff. This is just an example of the exogenic unmanaged pressures, things that are going to happen from outside the system where we don't really have we're not controlling those when we're managing the sea, but we do have to respond to them. So the endogenic stuff, we're managing the causes and the consequences. The exogenic stuff, we're only managing the consequences. So temperature changes globally, we have to manage the consequences of that. Sea level rise that's happening globally, we just have to manage the consequences of this. Okay, so you've got a message there in that. We then need, when we're managing, there's an axiom in business that says you can't manage something unless you can measure it. And therefore we need indicators, we need metrics in order to manage things. And this just shows the sorts of metrics that we have. For an indicator we have the number of activities. So how many navigation routes, how many boats are there, what is the size of fishing fleets? The pressures, what is the footprint of the effect of each of those activities? The state change, how much has the local fish population changed? How much did we change the sediments and so on? The impact on human welfare, sort of what benefits are we getting, or even what benefits are we losing from damaging the system? And then responses. How many regulations, what are the economic costs and so on. And now I'll try and go over these. But so the main point is, if we're if we're going to manage things, then we have to be able to measure them as well. We're now, many of you will have come across, excuse me. This is a warm day in London. Okay, many of you will have come across quality assurance in chemical analyses, in biological analyses, in engineering methods and so on. Nowadays, what we're trying to do is get quality assurance in marine decision making. And that's the report that's mentioned on the left-hand side there. It is all about a risk analysis system, but it's quality assurance. Can we make sure our decisions are defendable? Because increasingly, we may be asked to defend our decisions on how we manage the system in a court of law. And so we have to make sure they're good. So, all of these things I've been talking about up to now are risk analysis, risk assessment rather, and risk management. So we've created the problems, it's going to give us a risk, how do we assess it, and how do we manage it? Now, all of you carry out risk assessment and risk management every day of your life. If you're crossing the road, you're carrying out risk assessment and risk management. The fact that you're listening to this means that you've done it successfully. So risk assessment is saying where the problem's coming from, risk management is what do we do about those. Now those of you from engineering backgrounds will have been dealing with this for probably all your working life, because this is bread and butter for, if you're doing the engineering, if you're building a power station, this is what you're dealing with. It's only recently are natural scientists and environmental scientists taking this stuff on board. So we then need a rigorous way of assessing the risk and then managing it. And this is the typical risk assessment. And I say, those of you who come from engineering backgrounds, this will be meat and drink to you. This is exactly what you're doing. What we're now doing is saying, how do we bring this into the environmental world? And how do we use this to assess and manage the degree of risks that we've just been talking about there? So, as you see there, it's quite easy. Where's the problem coming from? Can we identify it? Can we assess it? Then, what are the consequences and can we manage it? So let's use the methods that industry uses for doing risk assessment and risk management. Let's use their methods. Because if we use their methods, then it means that they're more likely, the people causing the problem are more likely to take notice of us. If we're just talking in environmental terms, one set of tree huggers to another set of tree huggers, people will stop listening. But if we use the same terms that industry use, then it's much better. And this is a framework, this is an ISO, an International Standards Organization framework, an ISO compliant framework for risk analysis and risk management. And yeah, it looks a bit complicated, but actually it's fairly straightforward. In the middle, you've got a problem. What are we worried about? Are we worried about the coast flooding? Are we worried about a tsunami coming? Are we worried about the loss of a fish stock and so on? So that's that red circle in the middle that's had the main cause is the hatch block, the yellow and black block above it. That red circle's got a set of causes, which are the blue boxes on the left-hand side. And we've got a whole set of causes. We're going to lose the fish stock, then what will cause us to do that? And there's all of these causes. Could we put in a prevention mechanism between that blue rectangle and the red circle? Can we put in a prevention mechanism? Yeah, change the way you're doing something. Or don't go and fishing that way, or don't build something in that way. We could put in a prevention mechanism. But the problem might still occur, and if we know the problem is still going to occur, then what can we do about it? Well, we could put in, or if it's going to occur, it's going to lead to consequences, and that's the red blocks on the right-hand side of it, so the red rectangles. So we're going to have consequences. So we've got a central problem that's going to lead to consequences. So what can we do about that? Well, we could put in mitigation or compensation. We can mitigate it. So if we're worried about waste going out into the sea, we can put in mitigation measures, we can put in a treatment plant in order to reduce the effect. So we've got a central problem, we've got a set of causes, we can put in prevention mechanisms. If that doesn't work, we can put in mitigation measures, and then eventually we might get consequences. And the aim is to stop getting consequences. And the bit along the bottom there, you'll see how it links to the DAP SeaWorld framework. Now these get very complicated, and we're now working on nested systems here. This happens to be a fairly complex bow tie, but not as complex as some that we're doing, which is looking at the effects of climate change on offshore wind power. You know, if climate change continues and we get more storminess and we get higher tides and you know, more variable conditions and so on, what will that do for offshore wind power? So you'll see then the bow ties get fairly complicated. And one of the things we're working on at the moment with a German group is how we quantify these and how we turn them into a model using something called Bayesian belief network modeling. So what do we do about these problems? How do we tackle these problems? Well, we've got a whole set of things that we use to tackle them. And it's something that for a while now I've been calling the 10 Tenets. So 10 things. So a tenet is a basic law. Usually when I put this slide up, I have to mention to my students that the word is tenet and not tenants. I think 10 tenets, because it's a beer, is a good night out in Scotland. But these are 10 tenets. These laws. So when we carry out our actions to try and manage the system, these are what we're going to do. We want our actions to be ecologically sustainable. Of course we do, because that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to protect the natural system. We want them to be technologically feasible. So from engineering backgrounds, you will know, have we got the engineering capability in order to build something in order to stop environmental problems. But we're living in the real world. Are our actions economically viable? No, can we afford to do it? Can we afford to build a treatment works? Can we afford to modify a bridge so it doesn't cause environmental problems and so on? But what does society want? What does society desire and what does society tolerate? Well, society might desire the waters to be pristine and very clean, but they actually tolerate us putting sewage out into the sea because they know it's a cheap way of getting rid of our waste. So what does society want in all this? What about the legal side? Do we have the laws in order for us to do this work, to manage the system? And what about the administrative people? Do we have the right sort of environmental protection areas, agencies, or the management organisations, the departments of environment? Do we have the administrative people to do it? What about the politics of all this? If the person at the top, and it seems increasingly a guy at the top, doesn't want you to do something, then it doesn't matter if all of these things get lined up, it doesn't happen. So for example, if George W. Bush and Donald Trump, just to mention two at random, don't believe in climate change, then it means that we might not be tackling it there. No. And what about the ethics of all this? The ethics of managing the system? Well, as an example of ethics, when we decide to bring in some environmental improvements, it'll cost money. Now, we might not have the money, but what we could do is we could borrow it against our children and grandchildren. Is that ethically defensible? We cause the problem, they're going to pay for it. What about the culturally inclusive bit? That is, if we're going to do something that's going to affect an indigenous population, a burial ground of some Aboriginal group or whatever, then can we go ahead with it? And then finally, communicate this. We've got to tell people about this because we've got to bring the stakeholders on board. Now, this is a sort of a variant, although we didn't know this when we started this, something called PESTLE. PESTLE is the environment of a company. Now, a company has political, economic, social, technological and legal aspects to it. Well, that's what a company has. You know, Mr. Tesco has to worry about those things. Well, the environment also has to worry about those things. So what do we want from the sea, and how are we going to get it from the sea? This takes us into this, you know, what does society want? And what does the natural system want in this? Now, it's a bit easier to point to this, but if you can I'll describe it as we go through it. If you look at the top part of this diagram, by now you've got the impression that I like diagrams. I think in diagrams. I'm working with a guy in Australia who thinks in equations, but I work in diagrams. I think in diagrams. The top part of this shows on the left-hand side the physical system. You know, have we got the right waves, tides, the right sort of salinity and so on. If they're okay, does it lead to the right sort of ecological system? No, do we get the right fish, or do we get the right prey for the fish? Do we get the right birds and seals and so on? So that's the natural system. And we can talk about the physical, chemical capital and the ecological capital of this. If those work okay, we're going to deliver, or the ecosystem will deliver what is called ecosystem services. It will be able to deliver the right sort of water, it will be able to deliver the right sort of fish, it will be able to deliver sediments that we then have the potential to use. And this is what is called ecosystem services. But that's not enough. The system can deliver ecosystem services. To turn that into societal goods and benefits, we have to do something. And it's the bit towards the bottom right there where it talks about complementary assets. We have to do something. So the system can deliver fish. We then have to learn how to catch them. We have to build boats and harbours. We have to put in time and energy to catch them. We have to learn how to cook them. We have to build restaurants in order to cook them. We have to do something. We have to get off our butts and do something which turns the ecosystem services into the societal goods and benefits. And then we can put values on those. We can either put a well-being value, yes, we like to see blue whales, or we can put an economic value on them. Yeah, we can value blue whales in terms of ecotourism, or we could value a fish catch. So you see how we've started with the natural system, and then it's come to what we're using the system for. Now, some of you will complain probably that this is very anthropocentric. Well, I've got news for you. Of course it's anthropocentric, because there's a lot of these anthropos around, and we're the ones that are causing the problem. So it's a system showing what the natural system is, but from a human point of view. This ecosystem services framework has been used a lot now. The UK used it in their national ecosystem assessment. It's been used globally in things like the Millennium Assessment. It will be used in the Global Oceans Assessment, or the first one's been done, the second one will be done. It's being used in all of these. It's being used widely now, and so it's a way of valuing the natural system. The next one is, do we have laws that are telling us how to do these things, or making us manage the marine system? You know, one of the tenets was legally permissible. Have we got the laws that are going to allow us to do this sort of thing there? What is our governance? And governance, as you see there, is defined as the policies, the politics, the laws, and the administration. And we've got a set of principles that all of our countries have signed up for now. Now, we want ecologically sustainable development. We want intergenerational equity, the differences between generations. We're going to work on the precautionary principle. That is, unless you can demonstrate something is not going to cause a problem, then don't do it. We're going to try and conserve, because we realise it's good for us and the planet, biological diversity and integrity. We're going to economically value the environment and try and work on those. We have something called the polluter pays principle, or now the developer, what we've started calling the developer debit principle. And that is, if you're the one that wants to do something in the environment that could cause damage, then you're the one that's going to have to pay for it. You know, you want to put out waste, you're going to have to build the treatment works and so on. Carry out an environmental impact assessment and so on. And then let's say the last two, waste minimisation. Well, we want to minimise waste. We're not very good at it, but we want to do it. And then we want to carry out public participation. And these are policies or principles that are now adopted all over the world. So let's say how many things that we do in the sea. That diagram shows an inner box, which is all of our international obligations. You know, the way we've signed up to shipping controls and controls on moving species around, and controls on disposing material or seabed extraction or whatever. The red boxes around it, this is a generic diagram, but the red boxes around it are showing all the things that we do in the sea. And if you get a chance to look at that, you'll see there are things related to, you know, we want to put waste out, we want clean water for bathing, we want fisheries, we want good marine archaeology, you name it, they're all there. So this is like a generic diagram. And all maritime states have to do this. If you want a clean environment, a clean, well-protected environment, you have to have laws that do all these. And it gets complicated. This was a paper that we published with Sue Boys a few years ago now, and the paper is called The Ultimate Horrendogram. It's the complex legal system. Now, bear with me. The central block on that, the bit with the blue squares on it and the orange squares on it, are international obligations that the UK has signed up to. In fact, most countries have signed up to these. And you'll recognise them, IMO and CITES and the London Convention for Disposal and so on. The red boxes are all the European legislation that, or the directives and regulations, that a country like the UK, a European member state, that some of us hope will remain a European member state, but it's getting awfully close to idiots taking us out of Europe, but we'll probably not dwell on that. But these are all the things that Europe is requiring us to do, and the things that we've agreed to do. And dare I say it, some of those were created by Brits because we've been doing this stuff for a long time. The blue ovals are what those directives and regulations from Brussels require us to do. And again, we've been doing those a lot, quite a long time. The green boxes are the way that European legislation then gets brought into the UK legislation, and it comes in as either acts that we've had for a long time, or regulations that we just adopt because of we've signed up to the European acts. And then finally, the purple ovals at the outside, they're things that require us to what the UK legislation requires us to do. Now, I don't really care whether you like Europe or you don't like Europe. I've just said I'm a Europhile. I quite like Europe, and I think it's done a lot for us. A lot of that legislation we had in the UK, but some of you may remember when we were described as the dirty man of Europe, and we didn't have all of that. Now we've got it. The government are busy toying with the idea of how do they keep all of this, but at the same time come out of Europe, which is a conundrum that these great brains in Westminster are going to try and deal with. Not very successfully. But that's the legislation framework, and it doesn't matter whether you're in Europe or out of Europe. If you want the clean seas and you want fish you can eat and you want bathing waters that you can swim in and so on, and you've got water that's clean enough for industry to take out, then you need all of those things. And this is why the likes of DEFRA at the moment are having to recruit a huge number of people in order to cope with this. If you've got all that legislation, you need someone to carry it out. And this is the administrations, and you can't read this, but it just tell you the paper that it came from. These are the administrations that a country like the UK, actually this is for England because the devolved administrations are slightly different. They have different names, but they're still doing the same things. These are the bodies that we've got to carry out all that. So we've got all of this legislation to help carry things out, and then we need bodies to do that, and this is the administration there. And we've looked at different countries. I've got these diagrams for Australia, and we've done for Portugal and the Baltic and so on. And all maritime countries are the same. And it's the same with the jurisdiction that is covered. Now again, it's difficult for you to see this, but that top bit shows a small building at the top of the shore, and then the sea gets deeper as you go towards the right. And all of those boxes in there tells you how far the management of the seas is going to go out. And so some of you may be aware of this. So we've got the laws, we've got the administrative bodies, we know which bits we control. And this shows it in a different format. This is a schematic, so it's a stylized bit of coast and sea area, and those boxes on it, those circles, tell you what is the jurisdiction by a lot of this European legislation. Some of it is for the land and fresh waters, like the Water Framework Directive, and that goes out into the estuaries. Some of it, like the Marine Strategy Directive, goes out to the 200 nautical mile limit. So, if we're going to do a lot of things in the sea, we need to control them. And on that diagram, you'll see there's an area for aggregate extraction, there's an area for wind farms, there's an oil and gas extraction, there's a bit of fishing area and so on. So, if we've got that, then we have to control the way we use that there and that. So let's just very, very quickly talk about a couple of main bits of legislation of how we control the sea and what they require us to do. So one of them is the Marine Strategy Framework Directive, the European directive. As you see there, it relates to 11 descriptors. So those are things that you would see. We want biodiversity, we don't want alien species, we want to control fishing, we want good hydrography, we want good seafloor integrity, we don't want eutrophication, which is over-enrichment of the waters and so on. So we've got the Marine Strategy Directive that requires us to control all of those things. And if we leave Europe, then we will still have to do that. But I might come back to that then. Some of those are controlled by things we do in an area, and they're the fault of what we do in an area, like eutrophication is nutrients that are running off into the land. Some of these things are caused by events outside, like invasive species may come from, for example, opening up the Arctic with the ice melting, and we get more alien species coming in there. I shan't go into too much detail, but there's lots been published on this. But the Marine Strategy Framework Directive is fairly simple. It's saying, what is your area like? Can you measure what it's like according to these descriptors? Have you got a monitoring strategy? If you find a problem, what measures have you got for this? Sort of, what can you do about it? And you have to keep doing this cycle every 6 years or so. So it's a way of working out the problems, working out the status, and then trying to do something to control it. So back to what I said earlier, when I said we need, if you can't manage something unless you can measure it. So we need measurements to say how well is the system doing. And this is an example of what measurements have we got in order to work out how well the system's doing. And you'll see there This thing, where it says D1, that's the descriptor for the Marine Strategy Framework Directive, one for biodiversity. And these are the measures whereby we can check whether our system is doing well. And you'll recognise these. You know, is there enough seals? Are the birds okay? What breeding success would you expect for birds and so on? And it goes on. Indicators for fish and cephalopods. Have we got the right fish species there? Are they the right sizes? Are they in the right places there? What about the benthic habitats, the seabed? Are they, as you would expect? Have we got the right cover by algae? Have we got the right habitats there? Are any of the habitats being lost? So we've got indicators for these. And then finally, this is just for the biodiversity ones, and these are just examples. What about the pelagic ones? Have we got the right sort of plankton and zooplankton and so on? And the food webs, have we got the right sort of food webs there? So it's saying, have we got indicators that tell us that the system is working okay? And the final bit there, the NIS, is non-indigenous species. So it's what are the populations of alien species coming in? So we've got these measures for that, and I haven't got time to go over it of saying what the indicators are measuring each of those, but you get the message. Now that's a European directive on biodiversity, but we're also signed up to international agreements on biodiversity. This refers to the Convention for Biological Diversity, a global agreement, and a set of targets there. And you see there the things that it's requiring a country to do. So there are global targets, there are European targets, and also there are UK targets for this. Or each country has its own targets there. So we've got these. The latest one is a set of what is called SDGs, which are the Sustainable Development Goals, which are UN derived. And there are 17 of these Sustainable Development Goals. For those who are working on the sea, the most important one is SDG 14. Sustainable Development Goal 14 is to do with the sea. So it's saying, can each country manage the sea in order to reach these targets? Now, you get a chance later to read these things, but these are the sets of targets that have been developed for the Sustainable Development Goal to try and ensure, have we got the sea in the state we want it. The bit at the side there about SMART is where we did an analysis to try and look at, are these targets good enough for management? That is, are they specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time-bounded? Are they good targets? So that if you've got a target, you could go out and do monitoring and work out just, have you met the target? There's no point in having a target if you can't go and measure it and then do something about it if you haven't measured it. And these go on, so we'll get that now. So that was one direction. The next direction is, again, it's fairly recent, it's only been like the last 5 years or so, and this is how we plan for the sea. We have spatial planning on land, but how we do it for the sea, what's called MSP, or Maritime Spatial Planning, sometimes called Marine Spatial Planning. And as you see there, MSP, Marine Spatial Planning, or Maritime Spatial Planning, is trying to work out where do we have activities and where do we give people permission to carry out those activities. There's a new European directive, it came in about 4 years ago, the MSP directive, which is to try and get Europe to have a coordinated approach to this throughout the seas. So again, we in the UK will be following this, and so will the Dutch for the other half of the North Sea, or the Germans for part of the North Sea, or the French for the Channel, or Ireland for the Irish Sea. So we're all doing the same thing. And this is why we need marine spatial planning. This is some work we did a long time ago now. those of you recognise the map at the left-hand side there is the Irish Sea, and it just shows all the things that are happening in the sea. That's why we need marine spatial planning or maritime spatial planning. The other inset is Liverpool Bay, which shows from a different scale. In the UK, we're now well advanced because of the Marine and Coastal Access Act. We're fairly well advanced to bringing in spatial plans. This happened to be, this refers to the English spatial plans, the ones that the Marine Management Organisation are bringing in, but it just shows the spatial plans that we're bringing in, and these are on the way, well on the way. Again, it's trying to say what happens where and how does it happen. If you want a slightly simpler system, this is Belgium's maritime spatial plan. Now, if you've got a coastline of only 69 kilometres and a very small part of the North Sea, then having a plan for it is not a great challenge. 69 kilometres as opposed to whatever it is, 30,000 kilometres for the UK. It's a different scale. But it shows why we need planning for this system. So let's just very quickly take that back, take us back to our stylised plan for it, our stylised bit of sea area. So that's our stylised bit of sea area. There's a sea area, there's an estuary, there's various things happening in there. There's wind farms, there's oil and gas exploration, there's obtaining blue technology, there's fisheries areas, there's aquaculture, there's recreation. So somehow we have to manage an area to allow those things to happen, but without screwing up, well, to screw up is a biological term, without screwing up the rest of the system. So we're trying to do those now. And we started trying to look at how do we rectify these two things, the marine spatial planning, the maritime spatial planning, and the Marine Strategy Framework Directive. One is on how do we get blue growth, the other one is how do we get good environmental status. So it's this big problem. Someone comes along, and some of you may be in this position, and wants to do something in the sea. So it's saying, where could you do it? Where do you want to do it? Where can you be allowed to do it? Where should it be? Where can it be? You know, you can't have a wind farm everywhere, and some areas are not suitable for wind farm. You can't have aggregate extraction everywhere because some areas are not suitable for it. So trying to look at how do we balance all of this, and without going into, I describe this as the elephant in the room. And the cartoon there is as I noticed that usually the person creating the problems in cartoons is some bald-headed old grey-haired guy with glasses, and I can't understand this. When we're trying to decide what should go in an area and how much stuff we can have in an area, in essence we're doing two things. We're looking at what is called the assimilative capacity, which used to be related just to pollution, but now we regard this as how much stuff can we allow to be in the sea without it damaging the sea. The other one is the carrying capacity. It used to be just an ecological term. The ecological term, how many birds could you have in an area? How many fish could you have in an area? Well, now we're saying, we're using that in a societal way and saying, what is the ability of a body of water to support an activity? What is its carrying capacity there? So without going into this in a huge amount of detail, because this paper is just about to come out, what we're looking at is if you have a sea area with nothing in it, then it's got huge assimilative capacity or large carrying capacity. As you put each activity into it, we're going to use up part of the assimilative capacity, and we're going to use up part of the carrying capacity. And if we're not careful, we use up so much of it, we get down to the green line on that graph, which says the status is no longer good enough. So we've lost so much of the environmental status, we've just damaged the system. So the essence of management is, how do we keep allowing for the things that we want to do in the area, but not get to the stage where we've screwed it up so much that we can't get anything more from it there. And this is the paper that's just about to come out. This just shows the way each activity removes part of the assimilative capacity, but that's probably a bit too much detail for this. That hypothetical diagram, hypothetical area I showed you just now, this is just to show you of the activities that are mentioned on it, what is their footprint and what is their effect on the good status of the area. And you see there, the biggest one happens to be fisheries because it occupies the biggest area. The next point though, so we've got a lot of stuff happening within an area, and they're these endogenic managed pressures. But affecting them also is what happens outside the area, what we call the exogenic unmanaged pressures. So fishing and aquaculture and aggregate extraction are going to affect certain areas. But then so is climate change, stuff that's happening outside. Now, without going into it in too much detail, some of these laws that I've been talking about have what is called a derogation clauses, that if you can show that it's not you that's affected the area, but it was someone else's fault, then it's not your problem, or you have to accommodate it, but you don't have to solve the problem. And this is what is called force majeure, and you've all sort of signed insurance documents, and usually in the insurance document there's like a get-out clause, or sometimes called an act of God. Well, that's what force majeure is. It's something that says the people giving you the permission are not reliable for this, or you might not be liable. And one of the things that we started looking at due to some of these regulations, these European laws and the UK laws from them, UK regulations from them, is trying to say, would climate change be a get-out clause? So I'll give you a very precise example. You're there trying to manage the sea, and you're trying to control alien species coming in, say, from ballast water on ships. So you're trying to control that. But the alien species are going to come in anyway by things like climate change, and it's not your fault. Now, if say you're on the Italian coast and you're trying to control alien species, but alien species are coming through the Suez Canal all the time, then are you going to be reported to the European Court for failing to uphold a piece of legislation when you say, sorry, it's not my fault? And that's what force majeure is. And what we've said in various articles now is these are legal problems that are going to hit us in the future. And scientists are going to have to try and get some evidence to try and support all these now. Yeah. So force majeure, it's something outside of your control, something that you can't control, but you might have to respond to the effects of it. Now, just a very short digression. That some of you might have seen this film. It's an Australian film that happens to have Billy Connolly in it. Billy Connolly is a fisherman, and his boat gets struck by lightning, and the boat sinks. And he goes to the insurance company to say, can I get some compensation? And they say, no, it was an act of God. It's not our fault, it was an act of God. You're not covered by an act. Billy Connolly says, but that's my livelihood gone. I'm a fisherman, I don't have a boat anymore. No, sorry, it's not our fault. Tough, it was an act of God. So to cut a long story short, he decides he has to try and sue God, or sue their representatives on earth. And so the whole film is about a court case where he tries to sue the chief rabbi and the cardinal and the chief imam and the archbishop and so on, and it puts them in a difficult position. If they say it's not their fault, they're denying that God exists. If they're saying it is their fault, then they have to pay up. If it is God's fault. Anyway, But you get the message that it's something outside your control. Now that debate is coming into the environmental side with these exogenic and endogenic pressures. The next thing we have to worry about when we're trying to manage the system, and this is just trying to wrap all this up now, trying to manage the system, is saying, what is it that's going to stop us managing the system? Now, some of you have been dealing with industry for a while, and industries talk about 3 sets of problems, or impediments. They talk about bottlenecks, something that clears fairly quickly. Cars broke down on the highway, it'll get moved fairly quickly. Showstoppers, a bit more difficult. No, we might not have the right tools and so on, but we could go and get them. We might not have the right technologies, but we can invent them. And then the train wrecks, things that are going to stop us doing things. And as you see in there, one of these unmanageable hazards, like climate change, becomes a train wreck. It's going to affect those. So the bottlenecks, showstoppers and train wrecks, and what we start to think about is what are the impediments to us managing the system. So there's a lot of discussion about this now. So let's wrap this up there. We now know what we have to do if we understand how our activities lead to which pressures, what the pressures are inside our control and what's outside, what are the footprints of those, what are the state changes due to those pressures, do we have responses on them, are our responses going to guarantee the delivery of ecosystem services and societal benefits and so on. Have we got the right sort of legislation in order to control all these? Do we have the right sort of people to do it? And other stakeholders on board. So we know what we've got to do. We can now bring these things together. We've got our DAP SeaWorld framework, we've got our indicators, we've got our outcomes, we've got our laws and so on, and we can start bringing these together. And some countries like the UK, we do this fairly well. We've stopped trashing our seas too much. We still do trash bits, but not as much as we used to there now. A while ago I was challenged, and I like a challenge, in order to try and say, could we put all of these things I've been talking about into one framework? Well, this is it. And I'll just quickly talk you through it. We have the place where the problems are coming from. And the problems are really only coming from 3 sources. The extractors, the way we take stuff out of the sea, like fishing and aggregates and water and space and so on. The inputters, we put pollution in, we put waters in, we put buildings in, we put bridges in. So that's 2 of the problems. And then the third one is these unmanaged things, the climate change things out from the sea. We then need, for all of those problems, we need this risk assessment and risk management approach. So have we got that, this DAP SeaWorld approach? We need a set of governance, and that governance goes all the way from our local bylaws right up to global agreements. Excuse me. So this, what we call this vertical integration of governance now. We do this within a horizontal system where we have to bring in all the parties, all the stakeholders that have an interest in this. Not only the regulators, those who are going to do the governance, the extractors, the people taking stuff out, the inputters, people stuff putting in, who's affected by all that, who is going to benefit from it all, and we all benefit from fish and clean water and so on, and who's going to influence it. You know, people like educators and societies like IMarEST, they are influencers. Politicians are influencers as well. Why are we doing all this? We're doing it to try and deliver the ecosystem services and societal benefits that we as beneficiaries want. And what's the big idea in all this? Well, the big idea is what we call the ecosystem approach. And the ecosystem approach is the thing I started off with. How do we protect the natural stuff and deliver the human stuff? That's the main message in this. So let's finish this off. So the main messages. Have we got the objectives in fulfilling the ecosystem approach? Are we going to get the right things for society and the ecology and so on? Do we know the footprints of the effects of these activities, and can we address those? Can we detect all these pressures and changes? Can we make sure that when we're looking at pressures, we're not confusing an activity with a pressure? So, for example, a boat can move through water, but that doesn't mean that it's going to cause a pressure. It doesn't have to cause a pressure if we do it properly. Good business relies on good ecology. If we can make sure the sea is healthy, we'll get good businesses out of it. The essence is connectivity. We're dealing with a dynamic system. The dynamic system is saying, look after the land, make sure you know what's happening in the catchment, check the estuaries are okay, work out what's happening in the sea, make sure you know that seals that are living in one area and happen to be feeding sort of hundreds of kilometres away, that you're making sure that you know all those sorts of connectivity. Make sure we've got this integration, the vertical and horizontal integration that I mentioned just now. We know that we're measuring change, but the measuring change is against a changing system with climate change, what we call moving baseline. And we need the monitoring, the modelling in this. So the final slide. What I've done in a relatively short time, but you might have to go back and just check some of the messages. We've got all of this stuff in order to manage things. We've got the visions, the tools, the frameworks, the philosophies, the conceptual models. We've got it all. We've got lots of elements of governance. We've got the administrations. We've been doing this stuff for a long time. The decades that we've been doing it. Countries like the UK have got a good record of implementing the laws in the right way. So we know where our problems are coming from. Where we're failing in this seems to be just because we don't have all this put together in the right order. But we're a hell of a lot better prepared now for it than, say, in the 1970s when we were called the dirty man of Europe because we weren't paying attention to the environment. So hopefully that's given you a view of how we manage the system, what has to go through our mind, a bit of the links between the science, the natural sciences and social sciences, and how we manage these things. But what we have to know in order to get marine management. And of course the important thing then is, are we all prepared for doing that? Do we all have the right sort of background in order to do it? Do we train people to think of this, to think out of the box in this way, in order to take these on board? So hopefully you found that interesting. I say my email is there if you've got any questions afterwards, or you're wanting any of the papers, let me know. But hopefully that's been interesting, and thanks for listening. Okay.
Well, that's great. Thank you very much for that talk, Mike. I've got a couple of one question come through on the live feed from one of our listeners. You mentioned at the beginning of the talk about changing baselines. How do you manage with natural trends or cycles, for example, SLR or NAO?
Yeah, that's good. Good question. And some of the legislation I've been talking about that requires us to set a baseline and measure against that, what they've had to do is put in a caveat that says you're allowed to set a baseline, but you can change your baseline every 6 years or so. in order to account for NAO, the North Atlantic Oscillation, SLR, sea level rise, that you can do that. What's worrying us, and it comes a bit out in the force majeure paper, is that if you keep changing your baseline every 6 years, you will never detect a change. You'll never detect an effect because you're always detecting something that's moving. And that's the biggest challenge. In the jargon, it's what is called it's what is called the signal to noise ratio. The signal to noise ratio is you're trying to detect a signal, a change in something due to something, against background noise, which is the inherent variability. And we're not very good at understanding that natural variability before we detect change. And we're now aware of this problem. We've adjusted the legislation to cope with moving baselines, but it's not going to help us, sort of thing. What we might be doing is saying, well, an area, it's different from what it was 6 years ago, sort of thing. But it's a thing that's going to be challenging us forever.
And another question that's just come in, who also thanks you for a great talk. How could we approach this by implementing in developing countries who do not have our resources?
Yeah, that's a nice point. When I said at the end there that we've got lots of stuff, we've got the laws and all the other things. I think we're now at a stage where if I was a developing country and I hadn't got any of this, we haven't set our vision, we haven't got the law for the right one, we haven't got a monitoring strategy yet. Everything now has been so well developed, they could just take it off the shelf. And you can actually see this if you look at laws in other countries. You'll see where they've just taken paragraphs from different ones there. So they can learn from this. The other point that they should remember is, I guess it's what we call the 80-20 rule. The first sort of 20% of the time you're studying a problem, you get 80% of the information, and vice versa. So a quick look-see gets you to a large part of the answer. To get the other 20% of the answer is going to take so long. So these countries that don't have the vast resources that some of the developing countries do, by having a small amount of resource, so for example, you can very easily determine whether the water is polluted. You don't need complicated chemistry. You can work out whether the biota is okay by having very simple biology, almost like kick the mud and smell the stones sort of thing there. So a lot of these have got this to build on. And we've been doing this for a long time, I guess, in the West, and have spent a lot of money on it and that. But actually, those countries now, they could do. The problems, I haven't gone into it in here, but a lot of the problems come from a few sources. It's pollution going in, it's the fishing coming out, or whatever. There are, of course, some intractable problems, things like litter. And that. We've got lots of people measuring how much litter there is in the sea, but nobody's got any bright ideas of how to actually withdraw it all, let alone stop it going in. So I think developing countries, they could learn it. The recipe I showed up there, I think they could follow that fairly easily for it. But not doing it on massive amounts of investment and high tech and everything else, but by almost a quick look-see, and you'll get a lot of the answer back. I mean, there's a lot of the data now available, satellites and things like that, but you can get a lot of the information quickly.
Okay. I think that concludes all the questions that have come through on the live stream. So unless anyone has any questions in the room here, Rob, thank you very much for. Oh, you do?
No, it's fine, don't worry.
In that case, I'd like to thank you again on behalf of everyone here and everyone listening at home for a great talk.
That's good.
Brilliant.
Pleasure.
Thank you very much.